Do I actually think that people are going to forget about this over the next 5 weeks? No, I don't. I think Trump always plays for time. Everything we could talk about, the felony cases, the fraud cases, his cooperation with Russia, his blackmailing of Ukraine, he always plays for time. And that's what he's doing here. And in most cases, it works. But as you and I explained, Trump supporters also have time. They're willing to wait for this.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've had Professor Scott Lucas on the show. We've gotten all into this Epstein drama, the fact that the New York Times is reporting that Donald Trump did write a birthday message in Epstein's 50th birthday book that was arranged by Ghislaine Maxwell. So we speak all about that, whether that opens up a different story for the Wall Street Journal and the fact that Donald Trump has sued them. So we speak all about that. We speak about the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell was interviewed on Thursday by the Deputy Attorney General. We speak about what is next for Donald Trump. He suffered some bad polling, so whether that is related to the Epstein drama, and all about transparency and making America transparent again. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you so much, Maddie.
We are going to dive straight into the Epstein stuff. I say this to every guest in the last week. I really thought that we would be discussing something else by now, but this story just will not die. The latest, of course, is the New York Times is reporting that Donald Trump's name is in Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday book that was orchestrated by Ghislaine Maxwell. She got a lot of his friends and big names to write birthday messages. The Times have seen the list, but they have not seen the book. It comes, obviously, after Donald Trump sued the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch for $10 billion over this article that they published last week that claimed that Donald Trump had drawn a lewd, sexually suggestive drawing in his letter to Epstein in his birthday book in 2003. So Democrat Ro Khanna says that he will subpoena this birthday book, which is in possession of Epstein's estate. But this is a lot of back and forth, Scott. So how bad do you think this is looking for Donald Trump right now if it does come out that he has been lying?
Well, it ain't looking good for Trump. But the interesting thing is it's not looking good for Trump because there's a smoking gun that he's implicated in Epstein's crimes. And indeed, because the Wall Street Journal, I think, either has the book or it's got documents as well. The Journal is reporting this morning that Bill Clinton sent a 50th birthday greeting to Epstein. So did a lot of top-notch executives from companies like Microsoft. The fact of the matter is Jeffrey Epstein moved in New York society. He moved in high finance. He was down in Florida vacationing where other folks were as well. So knowing Epstein was quite common for a lot of the establishment. But here's Trump's problem. Trump has campaigned for years on the myth that he is against the establishment, right? So work your head around that. A guy who claims to be worth many billions of dollars, questionable claim, but he claims that he is. A guy who has had the most luxurious of lives says, I'm against the establishment and I'm for the common person. And that's why he ran with the Epstein conspiracy theory for years. Once he got out there through those whack jobs like QAnon, and others who were linking it to the fact that the establishment, especially Democrats, were involved in pedophilia. This was how Trump got himself in part into the White House, and when he was out of the White House, how he tried to get back into it. So you don't have to pin criminal charges on Trump for this to be politically damaging, because what his supporters are saying, not just the Democrats, not just independents, what his supporters are saying is, where are the documents? Given that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said she had the Epstein files in February, and that all she's done has released a few innocuous memoranda since then, where are those documents? Unless Trump can produce those documents, this doesn't stop. And indeed, this gets magnified over the next few weeks because we're into silly season. Everybody in Washington, and this is true of other countries at other times, everybody in Washington is supposed to go home to their constituencies. The newspapers have got to fill up pages with stories. So in that gap, apart from whatever Trump's latest mad tweet is, what do you work on? You work on the Epstein files because it's one of those stories like Waiting for Godot is in the theater, like Waiting for Epstein, never gonna arrive. Because here's the spoiler, Maddie. Trump doesn't have incriminating evidence on the Democrats. There is no Epstein client list. That was known years ago, but Trump ran on the fiction that there was.
So he's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. But it should be noted, Scott, that of course you and I both know that if you wrote a birthday message in Epstein's 50th birthday book, or you met with him, or you saw him at a party, you had a relationship with him, it doesn't incriminate you. So Donald Trump having some sort of a relationship in the early 2000s, late 90s, it doesn't incriminate him. It's just more about who knew what and were people involved. To what extent did they ride on on Epstein's plane? Did they go to Epstein Island? Did they know what he was doing with these underage women? Did they know through Ghislaine Maxwell what was happening? But you mentioned Bill Clinton, Scott, and of course, yes, the Wall Street Journal has published that Bill Clinton did write a message in this book. He said, "It's reassuring, isn't it, to have lasted as long across all the years of learning and knowing adventures and explosive, also to have your childlike curiosity, the drive to make a difference, and the solace of friends." Now, my takeaway from that is just what an absolutely cringy thing to write in someone's birthday post, but, you know, these are politicians. So I wonder, Scott, obviously Bill Clinton being named, it's not going to take in the entire heat off Donald Trump, but part of me thinks, will Donald Trump almost run with Bill Clinton as a distraction to say, hey, look over here, Bill Clinton was named, even though if he says that, it kind of verifies the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, that's why he can't do it, Maddie, because he said the Wall Street Journal was lying and he is suing them for $10 billion. That's billion with a B, right? So he's got his charade going that there's nothing to see at all here, folks. He's even called his supporters weaklings. Think about that. The guy who profited off Hillary Clinton calling them deplorables now calls them weaklings. But I got to slightly correct you on one thing, Maddie. It isn't just the fact that he writes the lewd, crude birthday message. It isn't just the fact he's photographed with Epstein. There is emphasized circumstantial evidence and testimony that goes beyond this. There are at least two women I know of, underage women. Oh, sorry, women I know of, not underage. There's one underage woman.
The Maria Farmer testimony that was resurfaced in the New York Times. No, absolutely. And just for our audience that don't know what that is, that testimony was saying that she, as a 16-year-old in 1995, saw Donald Trump at Epstein's office. He was looking at her legs, and Epstein walked in and said, "She's not for you."
Absolutely. And actually, if I remember correctly, is it the original accused, Virginia Jeffrey, forgive me if I mispronounced, Jeffrey, also I think indicated that Trump had an interesting relationship with Epstein. But going beyond that, what gets Trump into a little bit of trouble is that he's on the record, I think in 2002, where he gives an interview talking about, with an exchange with Epstein, going, Jeffrey and I both like beautiful women. Jeffrey likes them on the younger side. So the idea that Trump didn't know what was going on, we can't say that there's evidence beyond a doubt that would stand up in a criminal court, but certainly there's circumstantial testimony that Donald Trump's not an innocent here, right?
Yes, he did say that Jeffrey liked younger women, and Donald Trump always talking about how he liked women, but we don't know if he meant 22-year-old. Being underage, being 16 is a completely different thing. Regardless, Scott, what will be interesting is if Donald Trump, along with other high-profile people, if we do get some sort of client list, whatever that may be, if it comes out that there was some sort of knowledge of what was going on.
Here's what we've got, man, and this is what we already know. Now, there may be more, right? But what we already know as far as, look, the Justice Department had investigated this several years ago, and there is no client list. The Justice Department went back. This has just come out in the past 24 hours. Someone has leaked it from Inside Justice. It's in the New York Times. And that is, they went back over all the records this year, trying to find something, any kind of dirt on Trump's enemies. Still no client list. What there is out there, because it's circulated on the internet, on the dark web, for well over a decade, is that Epstein cataloged all of his contacts. So these could be people who worked for him. These could be people who he was just acquainted with. These could be close friends. But he kept emails. He kept phone numbers as well as the names. There are thousands of names on that list. One reporter for Rolling Stone magazine called 2,000 of the listings to see what he could find. There are only 38 names that are circled in that catalog, however. And you can guess what one of the 38 names is. Now, again, circumstantial, but maybe significant.
Well, the other thing, Scott, which I thought was an interesting point, Elon Musk, he wrote, and of course he was asking Grok, his AI tool on X, he said, wouldn't airports and airlines have access to a database of who was flying on Epstein's plane, who was checking in at the airport at the time? And Grok, of course, which I will say is obviously an AI robot, was saying, yes, these databases stretch back to around 95. There is a data log of who was going on the planes. And then Elon Musk said that in itself, if that comes out, would be the client list.
You can't, Maddie, you can't say that. I mean, the fact is that, people may go visit Jeffrey Epstein and they could visit him for a variety of reasons. They could fly in his plane. You can't say that they're specifically there to abuse underage women, and that, again, it's really important for us, I think, as journalists, as an analyst, to not fall for the prey of that every little scrap there and that, we have to go, A to B to C to D and then all the way to Z. You've actually got to be really, really precise on this. And again, I think as you started off with, the fact is that there is a difference between political damage to Trump and in terms of criminal culpability. But now I'm going to add something else that almost everybody tends to forget. What magnifies this is, whatever the political damage is from Epstein, Donald Trump, and let's remind all the viewers out there, was convicted in a civil court of the sexual abuse of E. Jean Carroll, a writer in the 1990s for a New York magazine. The judge in that case said that the sexual abuse was, and this is the judge's words, exact words, quote, tantamount to rape, right? Donald Trump has been accused by 27 women now of other sexual harassment and in some cases abuse. Now, those charges have not been proven in a criminal court, but he's been accused by 27 women. Donald Trump once said of his daughter Ivanka, when she was very, very young, now I've got to double check whether, I think she was over the age of consent, but he said, if she wasn't my daughter, I would date her, right? Now, look, the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump, you don't have to go to Jeffrey Epstein to say that this is a man who's very suspect in his behavior towards women to the point of having that civil court conviction. It's just that Epstein sort of gets the headline that exaggerates it. Go back to fundamentals here. Donald Trump is suspect even before you talk about Jeffrey.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm on the same page as you, Scott. It is very much that Donald Trump, it's just a fact, he's a questionable character when it comes to women. The entire 2016 election from the Democrat side was highlighting the way he spoke to women, spoke about women. So I'm on your side. But yeah, I agree. You could name so many people that have had interactions with Epstein over those years, as you said, when he was in these high-profile circles of New York, and it doesn't incriminate them. So you are walking this fine balance where, despite the fact that so many people would want these files, whatever the DOJ have, to be released, they're going to have to do some sort of verification or going through why someone is named, do you know what I mean? So it doesn't look like the public audience sees a name and thinks, oh, they've done something incriminating.
Which raises the question of the other development this week, which is the meeting between the Justice Department and Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving 20 years. Let me do a head start on you and see if I go where you want to go on this. If this was a rational, legitimate, sensible legal process, you can create a scenario where you go Ghislaine Maxwell precisely for the reason that you've outlined, Maddie, which is, look, there are a lot of people who are named here, but that doesn't constitute proof that they were involved in these activities. Ms. Maxwell, you were there, you were involved with this, what do you know? Now, if that's a legitimate process, but this is what's hinky about this and so on. The person who went to speak with her all day on Thursday was a man named Todd Blanche, right? Todd Blanche is Donald Trump's personal attorney. He was Trump's personal attorney in a number of the high-profile felony cases against Trump. He became Deputy Attorney General not to serve the Justice Department, not to serve the American people. He became Deputy Attorney General to serve Trump. So already people are saying look, is the purpose of getting this interview with Maxwell, which could lead, is it to get her testimony, or is it to frame that? Because she's been subpoenaed by congressional committees, because there is a lot of pressure on Trump from Republican legislators who want to get to the heart of this. And the question is, was Todd Blanche out there almost in a sense of playing coach the witness, which is, if you do appear before these committees, we need you to say this, but you really shouldn't say this.
Are you worried, Scott, that if that's the case and they've gone to coach her on what she should say publicly, are you worried that she has said to Todd, the Deputy Attorney General, that, yes, look, I did meet Trump. He was at XYZ, he did XYZ, whatever that may be. And their response is, if you keep that under wraps, we will pardon you.
I can only speculate, but that's an absolutely plausible scenario. I think pardon might be going too far, but you reduce the sentence, which is in the gift of the Justice Department.
Do you think that pardon would be him accepting guilt if Donald Trump did that?
Yeah. It is. Let's you and I talk. If he pardons Maxwell, because again, you have to go back to the basis of where the conspiracy theories come by, and that is, for years, you say that Epstein and Maxwell were involved in this, and you say that they were friends with the Democrats and all these other folks, etc. Now there is a window here that gives Trump possibly an out on this, which is when Maxwell was, I believe it was when she was sentenced, he did a television interview with AUKUS. And he was asked, well, what do you think about, Ghislaine Maxwell? He says, oh, I feel very sorry for her, right? I feel very sorry.
That was with the Australian reporter.
Yeah, I think it's Jonathan Swan, I think, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute. He's expressing, and Swan pressed, he said, wait a minute, you feel sympathy for her with all the crimes that you taken place? And he kept saying, oh, she was simply Epstein was her boyfriend. So he was pinning all the blame on Epstein. That gives Trump a little bit of a window if he can try to spin it. But do I think that the conspiracy theorists will buy it? No. I think, look, he's dug himself into too deep a hole in this one. And that's why, we should be talking about things like, with respect, we should be talking about the state of the economy. We may get onto tariffs, we may not, but we should be considering those. We should be talking about the latest developments with the mass deportation of immigrants and the complete ripping apart of legal rights. But why are we talking about Epstein? Because Trump supporters don't, at this point, care about the economy. It hasn't gotten that bad yet. They don't really care about the deportations, but they do care about Epstein.
But isn't that insane, Scott? Because when you speak to reporters who are in the middle of America or whatever, they say most lower income Americans, they don't care about foreign affairs. They care about the economy. They want money in their pockets. They want illegal migration to be taken care of. So it is an interesting switch, but I want to get into that and this
Sure.
I guess rift going on in the Republican Party, because this is an interesting situation that's going on. Now, you and I saw this post from Donald Trump overnight on Truth Social. He basically went insane, lambasting the radical left Democrats for doing everything in their power to distract from the great 6 months of service to America. He said they've gone absolutely crazy. They're playing another Russia hoax. The Jeffrey Epstein thing is a scam. All things are revealed. I hope this will take place quickly. He basically wants the grand jury files to be publicised, but a lot of people say that wouldn't even make a difference. And so that's an interesting thing. So I want to read that out because he's blaming the Democrats, Scott. And as you just so rightfully pointed out, this isn't about Democrats because we have quite a number of Republicans who are not on his side. Now, we saw Thomas Massey and 11 other Republicans have either co-sponsored or signed this Epstein Files Act, which would basically give, if passed, the DOJ would have to release the files within 30 days.
Yeah.
Thomas Massey tweeted after Marco Rubio basically sent everyone home on their summer holidays a day early to avoid voting on this act. And so Thomas Massey's tweeted, the Speaker of the House recessed Congress early yesterday for a month to avoid dealing with the Epstein issue. Mr. Speaker, the American people won't forget. My legislation isn't going away. It will be right here when we return, and I'll force the vote using a discharge petition. So...
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's break it down. First of all, by the way, the grand jury thing was an attempt by Trump to buy some time because the fact is you can't release those grand jury transcripts unless the judges agree, and the judges have already ruled, look, you only release grand jury transcripts if you need them for a further criminal investigation, possibly prosecution. You don't do it for political reasons. Even if they did release them, it's only a small fraction of the material on Epstein that the prosecutors held. So it doesn't get to the heart of what we're talking about. Now, let's cut through Trump's bluster here. You're absolutely right that the problem for the Trump camp is that his own party were demanding release of the Epstein material. So the House Speaker initially a few weeks ago, Mike Johnson, even came out and said, I would like to see these come out. Well, these House Republicans, like Thomas Massey. Now, I do have to say that Thomas Massey himself is a thorn in Trump's side. He voted against the big, beautiful bill. He's not a big fan of the president, but it's those other Republicans who joined him. And what they said was, look, you want to get all these votes before we recess, right? Now, to get these votes scheduled, you've got to go through the Rules Committee, all right? We will approve these votes going through the Rules Committee if you allow us to have an Epstein motion as well. And Johnson then flipped, protecting Trump, and said, no, I'm not going to allow that. And then the other Republicans said, well, what are you going to do about your other legislation? And you're exactly right, that there were votes scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday to try to get legislation, including on immigration, through. And Johnson said, screw it. I'm out of here. You know, his best Eric Cartman impersonation, South Park reference. And so, you know, and so the fact here is that there's now this double-edged sword that takes place, which is what the Trump camp are hoping is everybody forgets about this by Labor Day. First Monday, U.S., public holiday. The next day, everybody comes back into D.C. We're back into session. But as you and I just discussed earlier, do I actually think that people are going to forget about this over the next 5 weeks? No, I don't. I think Trump always plays for time. Everything we could talk about, the felony cases, the fraud cases, his cooperation with Russia, his blackmailing of Ukraine, he always plays for time. And that's what he's doing here. And in most cases, it works. But as you and I explained, Trump supporters also have time. They're willing to wait for this.
Do you think that Trump can come back from this, Scott, or do you think that this is the issue that might potentially shape or plague his presidency?
On its own, it doesn't take him down, okay? Because, you know, what percentage of diehard Trump supporters are people who will not necessarily vote against him over the Epstein files, but they'll sit on their hands. They wouldn't come out to vote. They wouldn't support Republicans. You know, we don't know what those numbers are. I still think the number one issue for Trump's political future is the economy. But if, as I expect, the economy is going to go south, so he's going to lose a lot of support. In fact, he's already losing a lot of support. Check out the polling over the last 2 weeks because the economy is dipping. If he loses that support, he can't fall back on his supporters to get him through the rough patch. That's the real effect of Epstein.
Let's get into the latest polling, Scott, because Gallup released their latest polling on Trump's approval rating. It's dropped to 37%. That is the lowest it's been in his second term as president. Now, for anyone who's not really across polling, 37% was kind of 36%, 35% was kind of where Biden was sitting in his when he was kind of in most flack he was getting for his age and his cognitive decline and so on and so forth. So 37 is actually quite low for Donald Trump, who always really does sit around the 45, 46 area. But this poll, they didn't ask specifically about the Epstein drama. But another poll, The Economist and YouGov did a poll earlier this month, and that found that 67% of Americans do believe that the government is hiding evidence related to Epstein. So within the conjunction of this low approval rating, Scott, and then of course this 67% on what Americans think about the Epstein drama and the government's involvement, do you think that Americans are losing faith in the president over this?
I think the faith was being lost before Epstein by people who voted for Trump in November of 24, but they weren't diehard Trumpists. And remember what we think the two key issues were: economy, immigration, right? All right, when you're in opposition, you can blame the other guy if the economy goes south. When you're in power, you can't do that. And the striking thing about this is Trump's negative ratings, by the way, we'll frame this overall. Gallup's a little bit lower than the average, but his disapproval rating is about 53 to 54%. His approval rating is down to 43 to 44%. So he's negative 10, right? On the economy, he's about negative 14. On inflation, he's minus 25, right? Americans are not seeing their prices coming down. They're not seeing huge growth. And remember, this is after the big, not so beautiful bill passed, right? And that was what Trump and his folks were going to run on. But Americans, I think, have seen through it, which is, okay, you gave tax cuts to the establishment, to the elite. We're not better off, especially when you cut our health care. So that has fizzled. On immigration, they've overplayed their hand because a lot of people voted for Trump are like, okay, border security. We'll buy into that. But they don't necessarily think border security means that you round up these people, disappear them in foreign countries, put them in detention centers, deny them their rights. That's going too far. And so he is now minus 5.5 on immigration, right? He doesn't even have a positive rating on immigration with these folks. So you set all of that up, and then you say, well, who could you count on amidst that 37, 38, 43% that support Trump? You would say it's those conspiracy theorists, those right-wing conspiracy theorists. Now, if you take them out, where's Trump's so-called base that's taking place? And here's the big question. How do you recover that? What's the big, beautiful thing that Trump can do to recover support? And I'll give you a stinger, because we can do it for our next conversation. What he has tried to do in the past 24 hours, which is just whack job mental, is he's trying to fire the head of the Federal Reserve without firing the head of the Federal Reserve. Now, this is the independent guy, Jerome Powell. He and the Fed are there to oversee monetary policy, right? Yesterday, they toured the Federal Reserve building, which Trump has made into this idea that Jerome Powell has a huge cost overrun. He's irresponsible. He should resign. And Trump pulls out a document that says, it's $3.1 billion. You've overrun. And Powell says, let me see that document. Because you were saying it was $2.5 billion. Trump hands him the document. Powell goes, wait, that building you're talking about was built 5 years ago. That's not being built. And Trump goes, doesn't matter. Now, here's why it's whack job crazy. First of all, I don't think that many of his supporters really care about the Federal Reserve. Two, he has been told by Republican legislators and by his Treasury Secretary, as well as economists, if you fire Jerome Powell, you're going to melt down the stock market, you're going to melt down the bond market, because you've politicized the independent economic agency of the United States. And yet he still pulls off he still pulls off that expletive stunt yesterday. And that's my worry, Maddie. The reason why I tell that story is it goes into the weeds a bit, is he will, instead of talking about how do we sensibly recover the economy, how do we sensibly recalibrate on immigration, how do we recalibrate on tariffs, he'll look to go the other way. He'll go more and more extreme, hoping it will get his supporters back. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it's just going to cause further damage to America.
It's playing with fire, and it's a huge risk to be doing that, especially as economists and analysts would warn that a recession is on the horizon. We're going to get into tariffs in a minute, but I want to start off with something else that happened this week. It was revealed that Australia and the UK will sign a 50-year treaty to cement the AUKUS submarine deal. Now, the other partner of the AUKUS deal is, of course, the United States. They weren't present for this conversation between the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong. This took place in Sydney. The Pentagon, as we know, launched a review into AUKUS at the direction of Donald Trump. So it looks like there are cracks forming in this pact, Scott. So when you look at this meeting that took place in Sydney and you see this 50-year guarantee between the UK and Australia, does it look like a message from the UK and Australia to say, look, Trump, we're doing this with or without you and we're not waiting around?
Hell yes. And it ain't the only one. Let's play some connect the dots to have fun. Okay, you're going to start off with Australia and the UK that were supposed to be aligned with the US with these nuclear submarines that were going to go to Australia, pissing the French off, by the way. But now, a few years later, now all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, the US possibly could disappear from that. So what do Australia and UK do? Oh, boo-hoo-hoo, no nuclear submarines. No, what the UK does is, here we're going to get some money, $4.6 billion, so the Australians commit to getting those nuclear submarines that are built in the UK, which has been desperately trying to recover its shipbuilding industry for decades, right? Australia gets the subs, UK's get 4.6 billion. But what do the UK and Australia also have that they signed earlier this year? Ah, that's right, trade agreements to try to maximize trade. But wait a minute, that's not the only thing that happened in the past 24 hours, Maddie. The UK also scored another huge trade agreement with, ding, 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 India. 4.8 billion estimated in trade coming into the UK, 6 billion in investment. What brought those two countries to sign a comprehensive trade agreement when the Conservative government couldn't do it for years? First of all, it wasn't Boris Johnson. Second of all, Donald Trump's tariffs sped everything up, right? But ding, 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 it doesn't stop there. Guess who else is talking to Australia about military cooperation, including a radar system in the Arctic that the Australians are going to help build? It's Canada, right? Wait, but that's not all. Guess who Australia has opened up talks with on defense cooperation in the past week? The European Union. Everybody is recalibrating and realigning because they can't count on the US. But do you want the inside story of why it went all pear-shaped over AUKUS ticket? This goes back to one of my favorite people, Pop Gun Pete Hegseth, the guy who couldn't organize a piss up in a brewery because allegedly he drank up all of the stock. Allegedly, right? There's a guy in the Pentagon that I think you and I talked about recently called Elbridge Colby. Now, Elbridge's stunt a few weeks ago was to suddenly cut off all military aid to Ukraine. Great idea. In a report that he gave to Pop Gun Pete. That got reversed within a few days. What Elbridge did is he said, oh, these nuclear submarines we're giving to Australia, I think we should build them for ourselves. I think the US should have them. I don't think we have the resources to build them for ourselves and for Australia. Forgetting the fact, or not caring about the fact is, you have a contract, mate, with an ally. Colby sends it up the line to Pop Gun Pete to consider, and we know that Pop Gun Pete's probably going to say, well, sounds great to me. I'll drink to that, allegedly. And that's when Australia goes, wait a minute. We can't count on these guys. We cannot count on these guys for what is, and let's remind viewers out there, for what is an alliance, a military alliance that goes back to the years immediately after World War II. You know, this was fundamental to Australia. But the interesting thing about all this, as I tell you that story, here's another reason why you can't count on the United States. You and I are talking about this, UK talking about it, Australians. Guess which story is? I can't find it in US papers this morning. It's this Australia-UK deal, right?
And at the time, Scott, oh my gosh, I remember covering this as a journo in 2021. It was a huge military pact to be investing in these submarines. But we don't have long, so I want to end on this tariff update. Now, the US has set a deadline, of course, for August 1st for these countries to be I guess, reaching these new trade deals with the United States. Some have already done so, but the US and the EU, they've supposedly closing in on a deal that would see a baseline 15% tariff on most EU exports to the United States. But you see this as a little bit more complicated than that.
Not just a little bit more complicated, a little bit more fantasy land possibly. And that's because a few weeks ago, there was a US-EU deal. It was 10% tariffs on the EU. It was some concessions for cars and steel. It had been hammered out after weeks of talks between US officials and EU officials. It went to Trump's desk on a Wednesday. He wouldn't sign it. Instead, on the Saturday, he said 30% tariffs on the EU by August the 1st. Now, whether that's just because Trump was having a bad day, just being a bully, or whether because Peter Navarro, his warrior protectionist, got into his ear, he didn't sign it then. But let me add the second thing in broader context, why I trust this as far as I can throw it. The U.S. and Vietnam, again, reached a deal for tariffs a few weeks ago for 11% tariffs on Vietnam. They were going to announce it a big deal. Trump went onto social media and says, I've got a great deal with Vietnam. They're going to pay us. They're going to pay 20% tariffs. And the Vietnamese went, no, we didn't. We didn't make it. So that fell apart. Now, the U.S. press hasn't caught up with that story yet. But here, let me tell you, this past week, Trump says, I've just got a great tariff deal with Japan. Right? Here's all these tariffs, right? But as part of that, he says, the Japanese have agreed to invest $550 billion into America. And the Japanese press this morning is still saying, wait a minute, where did that happen? We don't know that we agreed to that, right? As the Japanese prime minister is about to resign on another issue, by the way. In other words, you have one level where you could talk about how these deals could be struck. And I could give you a landing point where the EU might just accept 15% if they get concessions on cars and steel. But, number one, I don't know it's going to be 15%. Number two, I don't think the Trump people are going to give the concessions on cars, which means Germany are not going to accept this. Sweden are not going to accept this. And number three, Donald Trump could undo this on social media just like that. So I think we're 50-50 between August the 1st comes and Donald Trump kicks the can down the road, or he imposes the 30% tariffs and the EU retaliates.
We'll be watching that, Scott. We're only less than a week away, so you and I will circle back and see if that actually happens. So, Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you, Maddie. It's been a great ride.